My name is Ofelia Sato. I'm the director for Asian languages and also a faculty researcher at the Center for Multilingual and Intercultural Communication. MIC. You can hear me, right? Welcome to the first lecture of this year's MIC's Distinguished Lecture Series. The MIC brings to Stony cutting-edge research that addresses today's important and urgent questions that arise from globalization. Today, we are extremely privileged to have Professor Ofelia Garcia from City University of New York Graduate Center to speak on the concept that is very relevant to everybody in this room. Why everyone uses multiple named languages, if not multiple unnamed languages. That's why today's lecture is relevant to everyone. Today's lecture is co-sponsored by Provost Office through the FAST grant, which is for the interdisciplinary research for translation, translanguaging and translation. Audio, how do you check the audio? Okay. She started when you came on. Right? Thank you. And I'd like to thank my colleagues in the Department of Asian and Asian American Studies, Matthew Center for Indian Studies, Foreign Language Teacher Education Program, Department of Linguistics, Department of Hispanic Languages and Literature, Program in Writing and Literature, Department of Cultural Studies and Linguistic Literature. It is my distinct honor to introduce Professor Ofelia Garcia. Professor Garcia earned BA and MA degrees in Spanish and Education from CUNY Hunter College, and a PhD degree in Hispanic and also Brazilian Literature and Languages from CUNY Graduate School. She has extensive experiences in teaching in New York-based universities and colleges. She was a professor of bilingual education at CUNY from 1981 to 1997, dean of the School of Education, and professor of teaching and learning at Long Island University at Brook from 1997 to 2002, and professor of bilingual education at Columbia University Teachers College from 2002 to 2008. Since 2008, Dr. Garcia has been professor in the PhD program of urban education and of Hispanic and also Brazilian literature and languages at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Professor Garcia is currently a general editor of International Journal of Sociology of Language and the co-editor of Language Policy, both of which are very prestigious journal in the field. And Dr. Garcia was a co-PI of CUNY NICER, a joint project between CUNY and New York State Education Department for emerging bilinguals from its inception in 2011 to 2016. This project has created robust multimodal resources and supporting system for educators in multilingual contexts. Dr. Garcia has published more than 20 books and numerous journal articles. One of the most well-known part is 2 books, and this is Bilingual Education in the 21st Century, A Global Perspective, published in 2009. This is Translanguaging Language Bilingualism and Education Proposal with UA, published in 2014. And this book received the British Association of Applied Linguistics Book Award in 2015. Many courses at Stony use this book as a required material or textbook. Actually, I guess and these books are highly highly regarded and highly referred to by researchers and practitioners of translanguaging in the world, including me and many of my colleagues. These books read about named languages and bilingual education, and introduces translanguaging in linguistic and pedagogical concepts. Translanguaging perspective changes our perception on languages and language use, as well as our perception on human beings. It is very liberating to think differently about our languages and our business. And Dr. Garcia is truly a star in the field of linguistics and multilingualism, and the leader of bilingual education. Dr. Garcia's research and leadership are deeply rooted in her life experience. Living in New York City after leaving Cuba at the age of 11, teaching language minority students bilingually, educating bilingual and ESL teachers, and working with doctoral students researching these topics. She has received numerous prestigious awards. In 2016, Dr. Garcia received an honorary doctorate of Humane Letters from Bank Street Graduate School of Education. This year, she received 2 prestigious awards: the Charles Ferguson Award in Applied Linguistics from the Center of Applied Linguistics, and the Lifetime Career Award from the Bilingual Education Seat of American Education Research Association. She brings her work not only her intellect, but also her heart. It is truly a privilege and honor to have Professor Garcia today with us. I'm very excited to have her today, and at this point I want to get the words from Dean Dr. Sashi Hop, the Dean of Arts and Sciences. Welcome.
I'll try to check off one of two responsibilities of all administrators: be on time and be brief. So I wasn't on time, but I'll be brief. I want to welcome all of you. To those of you coming into campus today, welcome. Those of you from the campus, I'm glad to see you participating in today's event. When I arrived at Stony Brook, I was very excited about the idea of the language center that we've created here. This is a particularly important campus to discover and study the use of language and culture and how they mix. We are a fantastic campus and a fantastic region of a mix of cultures that make America truly what it is, and that's a very exciting thing. So I was very excited about the vision of the MIC, and I really appreciate the efforts of Professor Agnes and her colleagues in bringing this research center together and bringing together the kind of conversations around language and culture that are very much part of what we do and the lens through which we see the world. So I want to welcome all of you. I hope that this is a productive workshop for you today, and I want to welcome our speaker and thank you for coming to campus today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Cobb, and we are very appreciative of your coming here to support diversity and language education. And we really work hard, our colleagues, and we have wonderful students with different backgrounds, and we want to continue working together to foster their potentials and their aspirations. Thank you so much, Dean, for coming and giving such an inspirational remarks. Thank you. Okay. So, I think Professor Ophelia's lecture today is very very time when we Stony Brook has diverse community, just as I said, and today is Columbus Day. And there's some association, I don't know what kind of connection you can make, but maybe Dr. Garcia can talk about it. And the title of her lecture today is Translanguaging, Multilingualism in Education. Please join me in welcoming Professor Garcia.
Gracias a todos por venir y buenas tardes. I'm very happy to be here at Stony Brook again. My daughter has a PhD in history from Stony Brook, so I've been here before, which is wonderful to be here. And you know, this is a special place, I think. I want to tell you that Eriko Sato has been absolutely amazing, right? She has... I have never been in a place where things are more coordinated. So it's really wonderful. And I'm really pleased to be here, and I really want to thank Agnes for all her work in putting together a multidisciplinary, collaborative center that focuses on multilingualism. This often does not happen, as you know. People are in different departments and they don't see each other and they don't collaborate. So thank you, Agnes, for without that collaboration, we can't do anything. And then, of course, the very beginnings of my work are somehow linked here through the work of Srikar and Meena Srikar, who were so influential when I was young. They're not that much older than I am, but they're a lot smarter. So that they were really able to impact the field and to change our thinking when I was young. So I feel a real connection coming back and being able to make that connection again. So thank you for having me. So very quickly, I'm going to do 3 things today. Try to do 3 things, and I'm going to try to be on time and finish by 2, right, Eriko? Okay. And she's keeping time on all of this. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about what language is, what translanguaging is, what bilingualism and multilingualism is. I then want to take you into some classrooms, so think about how this works in education. And then because, you know, Eric and I were just talking about all the normalizations about language in our field that we feel that are completely natural. And I think one of the things I want to do at the end is try to disrupt a little bit of that, because I think it's in that disruption where generative ideas come out. So, you know, I say all the time, I'm retiring, it's up to young people. I always like to speak to young people because it's you that have to change the world now. So I always start with the para qué. Why do we do all this? Because, you know, without the para qué, it's not worth doing. I think one of the reasons why I think about language the way that I do is because we want to disrupt this hegemony, not only of English, but of standardized named languages everywhere that have been so responsible for the exclusion of people and for the failure of people. And I think again, because named languages are so attached to schooling and to education, they have been used to exclude and to fail. And I think it's important for us to remember why we do the work. So I always start with the why, with the para qué. So there are 2 visions of language. One vision of language is the vision that we all come with, right? The idea that language is an autonomous, bounded concept, that it is tied to the nation states, that there is English, and there is Spanish, and there's Korean, and there's Japanese, and there's Chinese, and Arabic, and all the other languages, and it's all in a box that we can somehow learn, right? But I want you to think of language differently, because I think this is what's going to liberate all of us. And I want you to think of And I must say that Enigo was saying this with her own words just earlier. So I want you to think about language as a widely distributed human capacity. And I emphasize the widely distributed. Everybody has this capacity to form relations with others and to have relationships with ideas. Everybody has that capacity. What is that capacity made of? That capacity is made of a semiotic repertoire, a meaning-making repertoire that contains both linguistic features and also multimodal features, right? So we are constantly faced with this idea of how do we use our linguistic features and any multimodal features that there are available to communicate to others. So what about named languages? I mean, am I saying that there are no named languages? I am saying that they're important. And you know this, you're going to hear me say this over and over again because I don't want to be misunderstood. I am saying that they're important social constructions, that we need them. But we have to remember, especially when we teach, that they're external to the language user, the language speaker, the signer of language. So it's something different from what we do with language. So again, just to remind you, language, I see it as just a human capacity to select meaning-making features to send the best hints we can in any kind of social interaction. We're doing that constantly. You know, when I thought about you, I had to ask Erico, who will be the audience? Because, you know, depending on who the audience is, I have to select what features I'm going to work with. So, again, the idea that language is not a box that you can ever have when you teach a foreign language or English or you teach anything. You're not going to have your students have language, right? But it is a capacity to do with language, and it is just not a bounded box. So some understandings then about language use derive from this vision of language. One is that we all, it's a human capacity widely distributed. We all have this capacity to select features, to deploy features, but indeed, the reason why we can't do this also without the social is because that selection is constrained sometimes by social factors. Where we're located and what our position is in life, right? So that selection is not free, it is constrained by social factors, and it is constrained also by the overlap there is between linguistic and social features with the people you communicate, with the experience that we have in selecting, the agency that we have as people to communicate, and especially the degree of wanting to communicate. I can't stand on my head here trying to communicate. If you don't want to listen to me, you don't listen, right? So it's important to remember that the listener is as important as the speaker. And that's why I emphasize this, because sometimes, especially in language education, we think about just the speaker, but you also have to work with the listeners so that the listeners want to understand. And this is a problem with communication, because sometimes we don't want to hear some people, and so the language doesn't work. And I think it's important to remember that it is a social act of construction. So how about bilinguals and multilinguals? Well, are they the same or are they different? I'm saying that they also have this widely distributed meaning capacity that has been enabled by this meaning-making semiotic repertoire that is internal to the individual, but notice what I'm saying, is constructed and enacted in social interaction. So it's not all here, but we construct it as we use it with others. We add features, and then our ability is to select and to deploy semiotic features that will be, again, the most suitable hints for you to communicate a message, all right? So in that sense, bilinguals are the same as monolinguals, but are they different? So I want to say, again, that the capacity of bilinguals And the practices that they do in selecting features are the same as monolinguals. However, bilinguals have more features in their repertoire because we've added features from different worlds and different constructions. And we also have more experience in the selection of features because we're often faced with having to communicate with people that belong to a different world and sometimes with bilingual audience. So the experience that we have in selecting features, I'm selecting English for you today, is greater than if I only spoke English and I didn't have to make that selection, right? So, and certainly my repertoire is larger, is greater. Anybody who's bilingual has a greater repertoire of features than someone who is monolingual, right? So it is true that the use of the language, therefore, given these two differences, is different. But what is important for all of us to remember is that this perception of some monolingual people as thinking that bilinguals are making errors is a social judgment. Remember, it belongs to the named language category. It is not a linguistic judgment. It is not a cognitive judgment. So I think, again, the para qué has to be brought back. Why is it that bilingual, multilingual speakers, many times their language is valued differently from that of monolinguals? Well, one thing Walter Mignolo, the Argentinian semiotician, taught us a long time ago to think about is that it really has been a part of the system of control that has been installed in the conceptions of languages by both the colonial expansion and nation building, right? And the other thing is that these differences have been purposely installed by what the Peruvian sociologist Aníbal Quijano calls the coloniality of power, and it's a manifestation of structural racism and racial linguistic ideologies, and I'm basing my statement here on the work of Nelson Flores and Jonathan Rosa. So again, this is nothing new. In other words, the Serinhars have been telling us this for years. They always say, oh well, our change was world Englishes. But their change was because it was a different conception of the world. It was an Indian conception, if I could say that. And therefore, the understandings were different, the epistemologies were different. And it was a questioning of how we were defining language, etc. So the question might be for some of you who have been thinking about all of this is, why am I insisting on the trans in languaging for bilingual? If they're the same, except they have more, why is it that we need the word translanguaging? Maybe languaging is enough. And again, I'm saying that I'm insisting in the difference because there are more features and there are more experience in the selection, but I think it's important for all of us to remember that translanguaging as a term was coined, I'm going to say, in the borderlands, in Wales. It was coined in Welsh. It was not coined in North America or in Europe, right? It was not part of the Western European epistemology of what language is. It was coined within a bilingual context to say, well, this is not the way we use language. I mean, when you're bilingual, you don't use languages separately all the time. You use that when you're in a context where those features are needed. But when you're bilingual and you're in an unmonitored situation, not in school, but maybe at home, you don't need to do this separation. So what is it? And it was actually a language teacher, Ken Williams, who actually started experimenting with a pedagogy where what he started doing was he was asking the kids to do the input in one language and the output in another, and in that way to bring all their features together rather than always work on them separately. I get my trans from who you are. You always get your trans from your lived experience. And when I was young, trying to make sense of who I was, because certainly schools weren't doing this, I read Fernando Ortiz, who's a Cuban ethnologist in I didn't read it in the 1940s, what he wrote. He wrote it in the 1940s, and he offered this concept of transculturación, by which he meant to oppose it to the American Malinowski's anthropological concept of acculturation. And what he was talking about was the fact that in any birth there is something different, and cultures are not transmitted wholes as two, but the coming together of cultural practices create new cultural practices. So that's where my trans comes from. Li Wei says that it's about beyond, transcendental, right? Beyond the named languages. I like to think of trans as living and using language in borderlands. Again, borrowing from the work of the lesbian Chicana Gloria Sandua. And I think the idea of the trans is that anybody who's bilingual or multilingual has more entanglement of worlds and words than someone who just lives in one word, in one world. And that's why I like the borderlands idea. So here's Gabo. This is my grandson. When he was 16 months, he's growing up in a bilingual home. My daughter, the one who came here to Stony Brook, speaks Spanish to him. Her husband is a gringo, but he speaks a little bit of Spanish, but he usually, speaks English to him. Not always, because we have this sense of language should speak one parent should speak one language, one parent should speak the other language. I mean, again, that was a Western European person, not an Indian who studied what happened in the home, or a South African, because these were much more complex worlds that were just not recognized, that were silenced completely, or Asian worlds. So Gabo says, at 16 months, said things like buy, no, mas, árbol, car, truck, agua, leche, agua, baba, nothing, right? So we can say two things. We can have two perspectives about the way he's using language. We can say, well, we can take the external perspective, the named language perspective, and say, well, he has English words, he has Spanish words, we have some regionalisms. For example, he says guagua, which is the Caribbean Spanish word for bus, whereas South Americans say bus. And we have some duckies and babas in there, right? So that's the external perspective, the social perspective. Internally, however, from him, what Gabo is developing through the social interaction with the bilingual family is his own language system, a unitary language system. I'm talking internally, right? With which he uses language to communicate effectively with his family. So he's always selecting. When John, my son-in-law, is there, he selects some features. When Raquel is there, he selects other features, but he is constructing this for himself. He's not in school yet, thank God, and he's young enough that he doesn't have to worry about this. Here's a small clip, which I don't know if you'll be able to see, because I can't.
When it comes to New Year's, it's algo que todo lo que es algo que we push, well, at least en la empezando con el floor, con el costume, con el y los friends que tengo ahorita, todos nosotros somos figuras, hacemos prepare para Erasmus, figuras, hacemos prepare para Erasmus, tenemos una financing para ponte de la noche, si estás en un comité de carnaval, no vas a poder.
Okay, so you get the idea. So this is Susana. Yeah, fine. And I think what is important for all of us to understand is only externally do we see that there is a switching going on as a social construction. But really, it's clear to me that Susana has one language system from which she is again selecting features, and I know that's the way that I speak at home, you know. But because all of us who are bilinguals, when we're in unmonitored situations, we don't have to be careful. We're careful when we are in situations that ask us to be careful. So what they're doing is what I and many others, including Erico and many of you, are calling translanguaging. Now, you know, I always say I didn't get this from my head. I did get it from the readings of the wonderful foundational work that I've read in sociolinguistics, Trinidad's work, Joshua Fishman's work, who was my mentor, Del Hines, etc. But I work in schools most of the time, and that's what keeps me honest, I think, because it keeps me thinking, all right, how do I think about this, but then not leave behind the kids and the teachers. And I was sitting one day in a dual language, and I'm saying like this because I hate the term, because what we've done socially, as you know, is we have actually deleted all mention of bilingualism or multilingualism, and instead we call the bilingual program that really leads to bilingualism dual language, with which I have a lot of problems, but we can talk about it. But you know, I always push it and say, well, dual language bilingual. Is that what you mean, dual language bilingual? Because I always think if we don't name our realities, no one else is going to name them for you. So you have to continue to name your realities. But anyway, one day I was sitting with a 4th grader in a classroom, and I don't know what I was talking to him about. You know, they always talk back to you. And he said to me this: even though Spanish runs through my heart, English rules my veins. Totally changed my thinking about everything in life, right? Because I started thinking, okay, this young man understands that there is Spanish and English, the social external perspective. But for him, it's one system, right? One circulation system. And I started thinking, all right, we're not recognizing the whole system for him. And certainly we're teaching him as if one part of the system is completely independent from the other part of the system. And that's just not the way that it works for him. So what are we doing? So just some principles and definitions, a reminder that what we're saying about translanguaging is that people are continually selecting and deploying the features from a unitary linguistic repertoire, and that we're taking up the speaker's linguistic practices, not based on the named languages of nations and states, but rather their own practices. Here's a definition, which you can take or leave, but it's a definition from Ofelia Garcia and Reed: the deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire without regard for adherence to the socially and politically defined boundaries of native languages. Now, again, I'm going to turn now to a little bit on language education. And again, I start with the barricade. Without the barricade, nothing is worth doing, at least for me anyway. So why is it that for me, language and education is important? Why do we do it? Because I think it helps us recapture the potential of language and bilingualism and multilingualism of students. And that's important. And because, especially for minoritized students, everything that I've said up to now is applicable also for majority students who are learning a foreign language and becoming sequential bilinguals, right? They're learning one language and then the other. But for minoritized students, there are terrible injustices when you do not recognize their entire language repertoire, because you're only using part of their meaning-making repertoire to learn, right? You're only requiring them to use half, and then you're assessing them with less than half of their repertoire. Now, what I always say is like assessing a drummer who drums with 2 hands, with one that can only do it with 1 hand. The music that child is going to produce with 1 hand is not the same as one that uses the 2 hands. So you can't compare. And I think, there are realities in life. Standardized assessments are here to stay. We have to deal with them. But for now, I have hope in the future. I have hope that maybe technology will help us change standardized testing also. But I think that for now, we really have to be aware of the injustice that it is. And when you're faced with that reality of having to evaluate one student versus the other, I think you should be able to say, okay, this is a score, but it's not valid. It has absolutely no validity because you are comparing apples with oranges. So what is then a translanguaging classroom and how do we do it? I want to say again that we are starting, that's what starts is the word that's involved. I'm not saying, again, that the name languages are not important, but we're starting with the children's or the adults' linguistic practices, not with a name language as a box that people must have, right? And that's the work that I've been doing lately. I've been doing, these are two new books in which are student guides, teacher guides, basically. One is, the one in the middle is the result of the work that we have been doing over the last 5 years in a project that we called CUNY Nice. For those of you who are interested, the website is important because we put everything up on our website and you can print it, you can reproduce it, you can show it, whatever it is you want to do with it is yours. It's a CUNY, City University of New York State Initiative on Emerging Bilinguals, and as you see, it's a large group of people. It's not just me. We are many of us who have been working on this. And one of the concepts that we have been working with is what I call the translanguaging corriente. And the idea that teachers have to work with the internal reality of speakers, with their linguistic systems, but also touching the external social reality of one shore and the other shore, to work with the entanglements. And that's why I like to work in the river. People don't understand me, but anyway, it's in the river. Why? Because this river has a current. It's a speaker's current as they use language. And this speaker's current sometimes in some classrooms comes to the surface. Sometimes the teacher pushes it down, but whatever, it is touching the two shores, the languages and the child, one language that he or she has and one language that he or she is acquired. But you don't start there. You start where the child is in the current. And we talk about 3 strands of this translanguaging pedagogy. It's what we call the stance, the design, and the shifts. I'm just going to talk about the stance and the shifts. So the stances for me are very important. You have to start with the stance. What is it that you believe? Is your stance one of they're missing English, or they're missing Spanish, or they're missing something, they're incomplete, are they deficient? For example, the conceptualization of English language learners is a deficient one. It's a lens that says they're missing English, right? And another lens is one of emergence and resource, thinking that what they have, the unitary language repertoire, is a resource for them to add new features, right? Foreign language speakers, foreign language learners are often given the benefit of that lens because they're usually people who are in the majority or have made it to college or whatever, so they're often given the advantage of being seen as emergent, right? And usually, otherwise, minoritized students are usually not seen as emergent. And that's why in the conversation about those students who are developing English, I've tried to change the term to call them emergent bilinguals. Again, because it's going to emerge. If you teach them, it's going to emerge. And even if you teach them in English only, that they're going to become bilingual. So you have to work with bilingualism. You can't put your head in the sand and say it doesn't occur, because if you're doing that, you're seeing the children as incomplete, and you are not seeing them. So how do you see learners that way? So the traditional stance is that there are named languages, that there's a first language and a second language and a third language and a fourth language, which for any of us who are multilingual know makes absolutely no sense. I know which language I learned first. I learned Spanish first, but which is my first language? I don't know, and I don't care. Because there are many definitions of how language is used. It could be the language that you feel more comfortable with, the one that others identify you with, the one that you identify with, the one that you use more. So it could be many, many, many things. It is, I think, a concept that is pernicious, especially for minoritized speakers. It is a way of excluding speakers to say, he's a native speaker and she's not a native speaker. I can see native born, I understand. Native speaker is just a wrong term if you want to include. If you want to exclude, you can say native speakers. But if you want to include, you cannot keep telling these kids that they're second language speakers. They will never appropriate the features and make it theirs if you keep telling them that it's their second language. It has to be their language, right? And we should be allowed to be able to enact these language practices in the way that we want to. And usually the pedagogy focuses in English only, for example, or English and Japanese, or English and Chinese, right? But always separately, never together. Whereas this stance of what we call the translanguaging junto stance, we use the Spanish word for together, means again that you start with the language of the students, that it's feature-based, and you're thinking you're adding, but you're adding features. You're not adding a box that people can add, but you're adding features that they have to start appropriating into their own language repertoire. Now, you're looking at me as if I have 3 heads, and you say, well, how would you get started? How do you get started doing this? You know, we've worked with schools all over New York State, and we get the same look from teachers, like, wow, you know, I'm supposed to teach English only, and I don't understand what you're saying. So I always put this up right away. It's a sign that I found in a school. It's from Martin Luther King, and it says you don't have to see the whole staircase, you just take the first step. So I always talk to them about what is the first step. To me, the first step is to build a multilingual ecology in the school. Without a multilingual ecology, without making prevalent and visible the languages that of your students, it cannot happen. A welcome sign is the very first step. And I've seen schools that have taken this on, and they keep adding languages as new kids come in. And let me tell you, there's such ignorance about this. I mean, I've been with principals that I say, well, what languages do your children speak? African. They can go back and find out what languages they speak. So it's a way, it's an exercise, not just for the community, but for us, because we have to learn about this. No one knows everything, right? So I may know Spanish, but I don't know Japanese, and I don't know Chinese. So how do we help each other in the same way that Agnes is doing here with the center? How do we help each other make sense of all these worlds? iPads have been revolutionary in my life because now I have, you know, whenever the teachers have a little bit of money, I tell them, get some iPads. Because Google Translate has gotten better. And they can actually even write it in English and translate it into, I don't know, Urdu, and they can even be spoken to the kids without even having to read. So you have to have resources in order to do it. I'm going to show you a clip of Andy Brown. Andy Brown, if I can get this going, which, you know, one of the problems with all of us is that we use Max, and then we come here, and then I can't find
Basically, what I did was after I had a couple Translanguaging PE sessions, I really just, got obsessed with making sure anything I had in the room was written in the languages that kids would understand, whether it's Polish or Arabic, Spanish, Ukrainian, and at first the kids were a little bit hesitant. They didn't like seeing things in their own language, but then I would purposely write things sort of incorrectly. And then they would correct me, and then after a while, a couple of kids actually gave me blank notebooks and said, oh, if you ever want to have a word written in Arabic or Polish, write in this book, and then I'll translate it for you. So then I got them more involved in the process as well. I think in terms of other teachers who are maybe reluctant to do it or wanting to try and start doing it is to really just have the kids help you 100%. Because trying to do it on your own, which is why I started in the beginning, was very frustrating because there's so many different ways to say certain things, and asking the kids, well, what's like the way you say this word? What's popular in your language to say a certain word? They can help me out that way, and they feel like they're part of the classroom, and it's more of a student-run classroom than just me speaking all the time. The kids like to share what they know in their language as well.
So this is Andy Brown, and Andy Brown, remember, is an ELA teacher, but in all classrooms everywhere, because again, we categorize kids. These are classified as English language learners, these are not, but there's a whole range of things, right? There's a whole continuum of bilingualism and language practices. So what he does is he constructs this multilingual space based on the students, not on what he's teaching. So it's an English classroom in name only, right? He knows that he's there to teach English, but he is starting, again I'm emphasizing starting, with what the students have, the multilingualism of the students, and he's building on how those students language. Let me show you this other one. You think this is going in any kind of way? I don't see the little arrow. Someone has to help me here because I don't see the arrow here.
Basically what I did was I would...
Wrong one. Oh, you know what? Oh no, I copied the same one. Sorry. All right, I copied the same one. So I'll tell you what Andy was doing in this, because we work with two non-negotiable principles. We always say every school is different, right? Every place is different. You cannot think of what the model is and then apply it. You have to think of who your students are and then think how can you build it up from who the students are. So there are two non-negotiables that we have established. One is you have to be willing to construct a multilingual ecology in the school. And secondly, you have to do a little bit more than show it. You also have to use it. So what you would have seen if I had done the right thing would have been Andy actually, what he does is he translates the do now every day into two of the languages of the classroom. He always gets it wrong, always, because Google Translate there 4 years ago when we did this clip was always wrong, especially with Arabic, when the order makes a difference. So what was interesting about in this clip that I was going to show you is that he then asks the kids if it's correct, and it's never correct. They always say, no, Mr. Brown, you're not correct. And he calls kids, the children to the front of the room, and they change it for him. So anyway, but what is important about it is that it's the kids then that are the linguistic experts instead of the teacher. The teacher is not a teacher, but becomes a real co-learner now. And he's very interested in learning about all these languages. Look, you think about it, the resources we have that we don't use because of the English pedagogy, right? So, but the resources, and it's amazing that what these kids are learning about each other. They're learning in the 4th grade. This is Queens, Ridgewood, if you know it. It's a neighborhood that has a lot of Polish, a lot of Uzbek, Spanish, you name it, it has it. And what they're doing is they're learning about all these different scripts and the fact that the directionality changes languages depending on each other. So he is giving them a very rich experience, much more than just an English language arts class. And he's also showing them that dictionaries sometimes are not correct because, of course, he copies from Google Translate, and the example I was going to give you, the word means, the dude now said something like, what does something mean? And he looked it up, and mean was translated as medios, but of course that's not the right word for what I'm saying. So he is really teaching them about the fact that, again, that these are features that are different and with which you can make meaning. I'm going to only show you then one more because I think we don't have time. I'm going to show you a bilingual classroom if I can. I'm going to show you and I'm going to narrate it for you. And one thing that we have been trying to do is, as you know, most language programs have complete separation of the languages. Now, again, I want to make sure you understand input, the very old concept of input is very important. And output is important. You have to have a space in which the students are hearing and practicing, right? I mean, to me, that's especially minoritized situations with endangered languages or with sign languages, and it's usually what people really understand. You have a deaf child, you have to have input in sign language. So it's not that we are destroying the spaces have to be kept. But what do you do in that space that the child doesn't understand? Well, you have to be able to, as a teacher, put on what we call the Translanguaging lifesaver rings and take them off. And that putting on and taking off happens sometimes for different practices. So a child may be able to be comfortable speaking in one language, and it doesn't matter, but he might need it to read. So you have to be aware of that. So that's what happens in the middle in most of these spaces. But we have been experimenting with this allocation of time in which we start with a documentation space in which we allow the teachers to the kids to actually talk and use whatever it is they have, because it's a way of the teacher understanding what the differences are between what the child knows as a concept and what the child knows linguistically. There are two different things, and we keep confusing it all the time, right? And then we always build this translanguaging transformation space, which is a project-based learning of some kind. But Carla has decided that during this time she is going to every day work with what she calls Cuéntame Something Space. This is a bilingual English-Spanish classroom in which she studies bilingual authors, right? So just a few moments of her class so that you have an idea. So one of the things she does is she reads aloud the first paragraph of the story. This is Sandra Cisneros' story. It says, the big box Kmart do not open till Christmas, but the mama said, not until the Day of the Three Kings, not until Dia de los Reyes, the 6th of January, do you hear? That is what the mama said exactly, only she said it all in Spanish. So then there is this whole class discussion about how they celebrate Christmas. And so she is expanding their linguistic and cultural choices. She then actually asks them to translate the first sentence into Spanish. And one of the groups comes up with the first sentence, you see, no la abras, but then she asks them to do Google Translate, and they find out that the Google Translate says no abrir. So now she starts telling them, well, what is the difference between no la abras and no abrir? So the children start to think about what are these choices? What do these choices mean? And it's not that it is wrong, it's that the choice is yours. So again, a way of helping the students think that speaking, adding other features is a matter of selecting the features that are important for them. Here's another time in which, another moment in which she has listed some of the words that Sandra Cisneros writes in Spanish, even though the word was in English. So, for example, one student says comadre, because I don't even know qué quiere decir comadre in English. And then one says means godmother. And then they say, what about caca and chicharras? Because of the beautiful double R's. So again, and then she asked the kids, well, if you were the author, what words would you have rendered in Spanish? So there's a whole thing about authoring a bilingual voice here. This was interesting. So in this book, of course, as a Spanish-speaking mother, they're bilingual children. There's a father who spoke English but could not read it. So she asked them, what about in your family? This is some of what they said. In my family, we speak mostly Spanish, but not really. My brother usually speaks English. Mi mamá usually Spanish. Las telenovelas en español para mi mamá. But my brother and I, we watch shows in English. Although everyone watches, I don't know, I couldn't get it. And then it always depends en quién está. When my friends come, we speak English, pero depende. Con mis tíos, español a veces, y a veces inglés, y a veces los dos. It all depends, right? And so this other student says, everyone thinks we speak Spanish at home, but not always, because I always speak English, even to my mother. But when my peers come, then I speak Spanish too. And then there's another one that just recently arrived, and he said, bueno, siempre hablamos español. We always do. And then another student who's gotten smart now says, pero qué ves en TV? And he says, SpongeBob. And she says, ves, no siempre en español. Again, to normalize the fact that this is the way that bilingual families speak, and there's nothing wrong with it. And then she asks them to rewrite the story in the voice of the bilingual family. So I just want to tell you a little bit that, I really see this pedagogy as a way of also building, besides linguistic virtuosity, also social justice and our ability to collaborate together to really be a little bit more just in what we're going to do. I'm going to say 4 things, and then finish. So one of the problems, of course, is all of these terms that we have been given and we have studied with. I'm a product of it. And people always ask me, well, what is the difference between the conception of translanguaging and the conception of code switching, or bilingualism, or bilingualism, or all of this? So it's not that code switching is wrong, it's that code switching is an external societal perspective. It's looking at it with the idea of named languages. And what I'm saying over and over again is that this perspective is important, it's very important. But the translanguaging perspective is a little different epistemologically, because what it brings to the fore is the speaker's internal perspective. The idea that this is always with us. Even when I speak in English only for you, I am selecting my features, I am translanguaging, right? That is always with students, whether they're in an English-only class, or they're learning Japanese and they're English speakers, or so it's always with us, right? Because this is all entangled. And what I'm saying is that that part is most important, and we always miss it in schools, because we start with, we're going to teach the language instead of thinking we're going to teach the student, right? I'm not going to do that, because he's wonderful. He tells us when he uses, the reason why he's not code switching is because when he says, y voy a la bodega, he doesn't put up a sombrero, and it's himself that's doing it. Okay. I'm going to skip this. Another thing is, people see translanguaging as simply scaffolding. Scaffolding is part of it. I think support for meaning making is important. I think we want to push this, and this is in the hands of all of you as you work on it, right? The idea that this is a possibility to really transform subjectivities and the structural racism and the linguicism that exists in society. And I again borrow from Gloria Saldúa. So how do you do that? And then just to end, that I'm not simply talking about transfer, because I'm not talking about something you know in one language and then you transfer it to the second one. I'm talking about the fact that there is no hierarchy, that all our features are the same, and that it's a social imposition that causes the hierarchy. And I think what we need to try to do is disrupt that hierarchy that causes injustices in the world. So I'll end here. So I think the idea is to go a little bit beyond the commodification of multilingualism, which occurs in standard first languages and second languages, and that is seen as simply a neoliberal economy. I'm not saying that that is not a reality, but I'm saying that to do that, we must legitimate all the linguistic practices for social justice and transformation of society. Y muchísimas gracias por venir hoy.
I'll let you know that after this we have reception at the chapel. I reserve 2 microphones, so whoever come, if you want to talk, you can talk more. But here, please, if you have a question,
So, I grew up in a one-language home.
In a what?
I grew up in a one-language home,
Right.
pero yo sé español un poquito, y I'm learning Hindi. And what piece of advice could you give me for working on my Spanish and learning Hindi?
Talk to a lot of people here. You have a big laboratory here, right? So interact, right? That's the only way that happens. But she has something to tell you. Yeah.
We were talking about the ELSA program for high school in New York City has. I've been here 5 years. I didn't work in high school here, but my younger brother, he went to high school, and he was in the English second language, which most of the time they teach pretty much everything in English, but a little help with Spanish, so he couldn't understand. There is a way, or is a future program that is just through ESL program, considering the language that is born as a really important language in this country, and change that to the language program, so ESL.
So I thought you were going to answer him. I'm not sure that there's any answer. There are lots of language education experts in the room, but I think that you have to interact socially, with media, etc. The more the better, if you can't go and live there for a little while. And on the ESL programs, I find that the ESL teachers, because they are now paid with higher standards, and these common course, well, the way we've changed, we've gotten away from the common course based standard. That's another political discussion I'm not going to get into. But there are standards, and they find it very difficult to move the children up, to move the students up. So more and more are thinking this is the way to do it. Because look, the alternative is to have a coloring kid, right? All of us who teach foreign languages know that you have to make meaning for the students. If there's no meaning making, there is no learning. So the ESL teachers have been, I think, generous with their taking up. Those that have the stance. That's why I say the first thing is always the stance, the belief that this can happen, that this is the just way of doing things. Without that, I don't think anything can happen. Yes?
I like the unitary approach to the teaching, and I agree with it, but is there at all any fear that students wouldn't be able to identify what belongs in which language and not being able to communicate as effectively with monolinguals?
What belongs in each language is a social question. What belongs in you is, I think, what I'm concerned about. And I think the danger is, and I'll give you an example. I work with a lot of schools in New York City. The French are developing a lot of French. I always keep doing this because I hate the term dual language bilingual programs, right? And I was in a school where one of the children said to me, "Oh no, I'm francophone. I speak French." So anyway, he was speaking to me. I just speak francophone, and I said, "Well, how about this child?" No, he's an anglophone. I said, "So does he ever become francophone?" No, he's an anglophone. Do you ever become Anglophone? No, I'm a Francophone. Now, that is not identities that are important, especially because the world has changed. The construct of nation states have changed. There's a lot more fluidity, a lot more migration, a lot more exchanges of things. And people are living in different worlds. And so I think the idea is that things have to belong to you, not to nation states, right? That's a good question, yeah.
Hi, does translanguaging only apply to those who can speak two languages? So students who grow up in different households with passive knowledge of a language and can understand, say, Spanish, but maybe they don't speak it, but they can understand it fluently. Does translanguaging only apply if they can speak it?
No, and I think that your question is good in making a distinction between translanguaging for what we call simultaneous bilinguals, who are students who are learning, growing up with two languages, right, or two or three languages. And you're right that most, especially in the United States, not in other contexts, not in India, not in many of the Asian or African contexts, but here in the United States, a very common pattern is that the children are passive bilinguals. They understand, but they speak to the parents in English. Very common, very common. So that happens. But I'm saying that I think translanguaging, again, because it's the idea that it starts with what the person has is applicable to all contexts. It's applicable to simultaneous bilinguals, to sequential bilinguals. It is the idea that what you have to do is not think that you're going to add a completely separate language, but that you're adding features, and that as you add them, you then use them and appropriate them, so they become yours, right? Yes?
How would you approach students with disabilities, language learning, learning disabilities such as autism, or who have trouble with just speaking one language and learning two if they're in a heritage language family? What would you do to help those sorts of students?
Yeah, we worked a lot with what are called ICT classrooms, that are classrooms where there's collaborative teaching, inclusive collaborative teaching. And they always say, this is what they've always done. The stupid thing about this is pretty stupid, right? Is that I've had, for example, Angel Lin in Hong Kong said to me, Ofelia, we've been doing this forever. Our books are in English. We can't teach the Chinese students in English only because they wouldn't understand. So we're doing this all the time, but the door is closed because no one has told us that pedagogically we can do it. And I see it all over the world, that this is what goes on. This is what goes on. I always say, I didn't get this out of my head. I saw it because I sat in classrooms over and over again, and I would ask the teacher, so what are you doing home? Today I'm teaching in Spanish only. No, that wasn't what was taking place. Or today I'm teaching in English only. No, that wasn't what was taking place. Because I think, again, we as human beings are much more sensitive than that. So we know that to teach, we have to make sense. So I think it's just liberating us from these constraints that have been put upon us by people that develop the study of bilingualism, well-meaning, by the way, but develop the study of bilingualism from a monolingual Western perspective instead of if we had started with multilingualism in Africa or in India, we would be in a different place today. So, yeah.
I look around at a lot of my family friends, and a lot of kids my age, they fit the criteria which you describe as passive bilingualism, but they can communicate with their parents, but they can't speak their native language.
Yeah.
And so the concern for me is, at what point do you balance translingualism with the loss of a cultural or linguistic identity?
Yeah, the question is that you cannot, if language is a human capacity to communicate, you cannot force people to communicate that do not want to communicate. My experience has always been that if passive bilinguals are put in a position where they want to communicate, they start developing the ways of communicating, right? And that is why the parents understand them. You know, sometimes teachers tell me, well, you know, this child doesn't speak Spanish, but the parents don't speak English. How do they communicate? They communicate because they find ways, because they want to communicate. They find ways to communicate. And I think the same thing there. And I think eventually, as again in social interaction, actually in social interaction, if you want to communicate in authentic situations, that develops, right? And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that it develops. I think it's a good thing that it develops. The question is, how do you start? Do you start from saying the only way to speak Japanese is this way, and if you only get it right, you can't say it? Or do you start by saying, okay, use what you have and understand that you're going to add features that come nicely to you and other features maybe never, you know, so, yeah, that's
earlier in the talk you talked about standardized languages, nations that are named languages, I think how languages are associated with nations. For example, there's no such language called English language, but we have one official naming process. There's actually none. Like the way you said, you use the word African language, there's none, right? There's no Indian language, there's Hindi, there's other. But in many countries, there are languages that are exactly the name. The countries that came about with the 19th, 20th century when nation states were emerging, and language are named like that. Even when it's not named, though, English is an American language, which is funny, which is paradoxical. How do you decouple the language from the nation in such a way that while you're multilingual and translingual, you still belong to that nation? You don't feel like you have to be an outsider, you speak multiple or speak across that.
I don't know. I mean, I think that all of us, are changing that. But I think we have to always bring it to the fore, because if we don't bring it to the foreground, then English only is, you know, and the sweethearts have done a lot of work to help us think about world Englishes, but still that doesn't do it for the multilingual term. And I think a room like this full of people who are grappling with multilingualism and grappling with being American at the same time, because that's the other thing, you know. What are multilingual Americans, right? And who are they? And speak up. I think the more that we speak up, not as Nepalese or as Indian or as Cubans, but as Americans, because I claim it. I think the more that